Okay, so we have some participants joining us now, and we'll give them just a couple minutes to keep popping on. But I see Heidi and Lori and Sam are on, which is exciting. And then we have more people coming. And I'm excited to talk to you more about, I know we were just doing some chatting, which was great. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more about resilience in kids and at camp and how we can build that skill. Alice is here, Anna's here. Yeah, Scott's here. Got some more people joining us. So this is awesome.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, thank you all for joining us. We are going to give people, I really like to be respectful of people's time and start on time. So we're going to give people just about another minute and then we're going to get started. And throughout, I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So if you have any questions or comments, let us know and I'll make sure that we get that feedback mentioned in. But we have some preset questions. We have some great stuff to talk about today and we're so excited to have Dr. Caren with us.
I'm glad to be here.
All right, we're going to give people just a couple more seconds, and I am outside, so please forgive me for the nature sounds because I have a 7-month-old inside. Never know what those sounds are going to be, so at least our nature sounds are safe and hopefully serene for everybody. All right, so it has been just about a minute and people will probably still pop on, but that's okay. I think it's important to go ahead and get started. So Dr. Caren Baruch-Feldman, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to talk about your new book, how that's going and the things that you have to share with the camp community. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your book? Or books?
Yeah, so my name is Caren Baruch-Feldman. I'm a psychologist. I was saying before that I actually worked at Camp Ramah in Nyack as a camp psychologist. It was a day camp, but they had a camp psychologist. Each of the Ramah camps have psychologists. And I also work in a school and I have a private practice where I work mostly with kids with anxiety-related disorders and ADHD. And then in 2017, I wrote a book called The Grit Guide for Teens, about helping teens be gritty. And then just on April 1st, my latest book that I co-wrote with Rebecca Comizio, titled The Resilience Workbook for Kids, was released, and it's all about resilience. And so I'm really excited about this new project, as well as some of my other projects, and talking to you guys about how it's resilience and its impact on camp.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we talked a little bit about this, or you just kind of mentioned it earlier, but I think it's so cool that, and I think camp professionals love to hear about other camps. So we'll get into resilience in a second, but just fun fact to get people really their brains spinning. You see that Camp Ramah had a really interesting model of being a day camp, but being an overnight camp for staff, right?
Yes, and I thought it was an amazing model. I think it is a model that people have looked into it because I think it's really, really intriguing in that the kids go home, but then the staff stays and they have tremendous programming. And I think that they think equally, or really equally, about the campers and the staff and seeing their development as part of their mission and in fostering these young adults. So that is very much part of their model. And I think that sometimes I think the staff is very good with the kids during the day because they know at night they're going to have their time and they're going to have their program and they don't need to socialize and do other things because they will have their time. So I think it is a really interesting and effective model.
Yeah, I love that. And I worked for the First Coast YMCA, which is in Florida, in the Jacksonville area. And our whole risk management policy was supervise, don't play. That's really hard for staff to do when they never get a chance to play outside of that. But if they got to play at night, that's awesome. But yes. We will switch into resilience. So there are a lot of different definitions, obviously, for any word, but resilience is one of those words that we just see more and more definitions for. So how do you define resilience?
Yes, I see. It's funny. I don't know if it's because I write about this, and now when I wrote about grit, I saw grit everywhere, and now I am seeing resilience everywhere. It's from everywhere, from politics to current events to things in the news. But I define resilience based on a lot of what other psychologists have based it on, which is the ability to deal with stress, to cope with stress and adversity in an effective way. That's being resilient. And I think if you look at the history of resilience research, initially, when they looked at resilience, they looked at kids who really had experienced basically trauma. They went through wildfires or really terrible life events and looked how, like, all these kids went through something terrible. Why did this subset of kids do well? And that was the initial way that they really were looking at resilience. But now people are using it in a much more commonplace way, just about dealing with things like, indoor versus outdoor recess, or that your friend won't sit with you at the table, or some from smaller things to things like obviously COVID, which is obviously having an impact on kids and our own resilience. So I think that it's a much more broader term, but that's basically the definition, is that ability to sometimes bounce back, grow from challenges or stress.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I love that definition. And yes, it has been popping up a lot of places. Obviously, the world is every year is different than the year before, right? And we always think it's kind of unprecedented times, and we're tired of the word unprecedented even. But what makes today different? Why is resilience important right now in our space?
Well, I do think that going through COVID, it has had impact. I think that right now, what we are, a lot of people obviously at the beginning were concerned about health issues, and now people are really concerned about mental health issues. The rise in teen suicide is grown tremendously. The amount of teens and kids that we're seeing with anxiety has grown. I think that when kids were home, there was a lot of things that they were experiencing or watching. There's a number of domestic abuse has grown as well. And so I think that there's been a lot of trauma, and even like, not necessarily trauma, but just negative experiences that we all have kind of gone through. And so I think that this experience about how to deal with that stress is really, really important now. And in addition, I think that things are also, in addition to just with COVID, I think that things are very polarized. I just, I'm constantly, just today in my school, people were talking about things in terms of politics. And I think that, like, even the kids are getting involved with that. And people are just on different sides of the fence. And I think it's making a lot more stress in people's lives.
Yeah, I totally agree. Talking about how this is more prevalent now and it is so important, what if we build resilience in kids at a young age, camp age children, what impact do you think that can have in their adult life? What's the change,
Right.
the difference that they might see? Like, how is that going to set them up for success?
Well, I think that that's the hope, is that we all are experiencing stress. So we can experience stress and sort of get downtrodden, or we can use this stress for an opportunity to grow. So I'll give you an example. So there was a child in my school, and he kind of got himself in a little bit of mischief, didn't want me to call his mom. And I basically explained to him, like, this is an opportunity. Listen, this happened. We can't go back. But if you can grow from this in 5th grade so that you don't make the same mistakes in middle school and high school, then it's going to have value. So I do think that everyone is going to have stress in their lives. Maybe they won't have something like wildfires or hurricanes or things like that, but everyone will experience that. And I think that as a culture, we also tend to put, like, our children as a culture likes to put kids in bubbles right now. So I think that the kids came in kind of in bubbles. They had this stress and sort of didn't know how to handle it. And so here we do have an opportunity to use the stress that we all are experiencing and being able to grow and learn from it, rather than sort of crumbling from it.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of I went to church today, and I like takeaways that can be used secularly or religiously, because I know that people come from all different backgrounds. And I think that this takeaway could really be used in the context of resilience. We talked about how this, when you build a strong foundation, like, that's not protection from the storm coming, but it's protection in the storm. And that's what resilience is. Like, when we build this skill in kids, it's not saying that nothing bad is ever going to happen to them for the rest of their lives, but it's saying that they can get through that bad thing. And how powerful is that to give kids? So I love that.
Right. And the other thing people should know is that kids are resilient. So when you look at the literature, or you look at people who've gone through really terrible things, the majority of kids come out well. And then for the kids who don't, what I believe is that we can teach resilience like a skill, just like we teach reading or we teach swimming or we teach, canoeing, right? We can teach resilience. So there are going to be some kids who genetically are just much more like you don't have to do anything. They sort of bounce back. And then there are kids who more deliberately, you can teach them the skills that other kids are sort of picking up more naturally.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that some people are just more predisposed to that, and that is okay. That people are born at different levels, and it doesn't mean anything about someone's background or what they've been through or who they are as a person. I think sometimes I think our camp industry is away from this, which is great, but you see people in your everyday life who are like, why can't he get with it, or why can't she do this? And we place all the onus on the kid of like, you should have this skill. And yeah, they just being born without that skill is totally fine, and not having any opportunity in your life to build that skill too, like recognizing that we all come from different levels and backgrounds is important.
Right. And I do think that sometimes the criticism of grit and resilience is that, people then feel like all the onus is being put on the individual. And I think that it is really important to recognize that structure and culture, it's not to say that we shouldn't be doing something as a society or something on a larger measure. I think those things are super, super important as well. I do think, though, just like we wouldn't abandon someone who is a poor reader and to say, oh, they're a bad reader, we just forget about that, then I think we have to see it in the same light and say, yes, there are some people who do that naturally, and then there are kids who struggle with that, and we can build that.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I think that that's really great and important for all youth development professionals to hear. So you've studied resilience, you've worked in a school setting, and you've also worked as a camp psychologist. So do you think that camp is a good place to build resilience?
I think it's an awesome place to build resilience. I think it's a great selling point for directors to let people know that it is a great place to build resilience. First of all, the combination of being in nature is really great for the soul. And I think that what camp provides is these safe opportunities to like muscle and kind of use those brave muscles. So like in the book, I talk about this whole storms approach to resilience, which is that it first starts with adults. So I think that, again, camp has those adults or even like the teenage counselor models being there for the kids. So again, the number one factor in resilience is having what we call a charismatic adult, which is this person who children can get strength from. And I think that when things are working well, that's how campers see their counselors. That's how campers see the staff, is that those are people that literally they can lean on. I remember when I worked at Ramah, when the little kids would go in the pool, the staff would go in the pool with them. And like, why? Because by them being in the water with them, they were just more willing to be brave. So again, so S in terms of storms, it starts with the adults. T, I think you have to teach yourself the skills of resilience, just like we were talking about before. I think that that resilience is a skill; it can be taught. And again, there are so many opportunities in camp to teach the skill of resilience. So again, I'm just talking about my experience at Ramah, and also I went to sleepaway camp. There are ropes courses, there are all these things, that hikes, there are things that we do that we can actually in that moment have that moment where you are kind of learning and kind of can process these things in a way that you can't do outside of almost even a camp experience. And then, you have to own all your emotions, the yucky ones, and sort of pump up the positive emotions. And again, camp has that ability to be a place where there's laughter, there's fun. And so again, you are really creating an environment where kids are in a good mood, and so that they are more willing to do things that are maybe a little bit more challenging. And there are times when you don't win at kickball or you get hit, during Gaga. And so you are having to deal with some of those negative emotions. And how do you then accept the yuck? Not maybe like that something happened, but be able to accept that. And then we did the S, T, O, and then R, you have to rule your mind. So how do you think about things in ways that are going to be more effective? And again, in camp, you have opportunities to help campers, to help them to think about things differently. Again, like in terms of sports or arts and crafts, you can think about the situation, say either I'm bad at art or I'm just not there yet. So again, there's so many rich activities where you can work on that. And then M is then you have to manage behavior. And again, in camp, you get to do things. You don't only just talk the talk or think about it or own these emotions theoretically. You're giving kids opportunities constantly to, as I said, to flex those brave muscles. And then last one, S, storms, is all about support. So getting that support, and again, peer support, the staff support, the director support, all those things are sort of built into the camp framework so that you have the perfect sort of recipe to, sort of handle those storms.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's awesome. That's perfect. You put it exactly in the context of camp, and that is what we do. And it's natural, right? Like as the children's caregiver in that moment, as a camper's caregiver, you want to build them up and be their hype person and help them cope with their lows. And so resilience is just such a natural part of that. But I also think that there's a component of making sure that we are mentioning it to our staff. So it's like a natural thing, right? But we can be even more intentional about it from naming it. So if you had to just give like a little 1-minute spiel to a group of counselors on why this skill is important for them to focus on, these like 18 to 22-year-olds who have not listened to your webinar or use your workbook, maybe maybe they're a first-time counselor, like, why do I need to care about building resilience in my kid, and what can I do really quickly?
So you're saying, how can counselors relay this information or think about this for their campers?
They think about this for their campers.
So again, I think that listen, anybody who works in a camp, there's a lot of fun, but there will be moments of stress, right? Yeah. And so I think it'll be helpful as counselors to know how to handle stress. One of the things, DC and Ryan are famous researchers, and they talk about what is helpful in terms of resiliency. And they identify 3 things, which is competency, social connection, and so it's connection, competency, and control. And so maybe something like a good tip to sort of just hold on to is you want to have, if you want to help with resiliency, you want to give kids control. Wherever you can give them control, give them control. Because when people feel control, and this is actually really true about staff too, then they're going to feel that they're going to be more willing to do something. They want to feel competent. So again, like when you're playing sports and you're seeing that things aren't working well, it may be that thing is too hard of a reach. Maybe again, if that counselor stands next to them, or they scaffold the activity to a way that they feel that they can be more competent, that they will feel well. And this also goes back to staff. Like staff wants to feel confident. If they're feeling like they don't know what to do and they're lost, then they're going to have a hard time being engaged. And then the last thing, and as I said, I can't emphasize this enough, is about connection. You want to, as a counselor, really look at those connections. If the staff is not feeling connected to each other, if the staff is not connected to the director, if the staff is not connected to the children, then it's also going to be hard for us to all deal with stress and engagement in camp.
Yeah, I think that's all really important. And then, you touched on campers, you touched on counselors, which is great. And now let's talk about directors a little bit. Maybe it's us, or maybe we have people reporting to us. Now more than ever, getting through these weeks can be tough, right? There's just more things than ever. Budgets are sometimes lower than they have been before, which means less full-time staff, less staff in general, more first-time counselors. How can directors grow their own resilience during the summer?
Right. So I think that everything I said about the campers in terms of that model also works with us. Like, so again, it starts with us. So I really, really do think that's such a great question. I think that if we are depleted, the whole thing kind of tumbles. So I think we need to kind of check and see where we are feeling in terms of our own resilience. As I said, the number one factor for kids, the number one factor for us is connection. So how do we connect with people? How do we not feel so alone? And in terms of our emotions, I think it's really important to learn to be able to not do what we call toxic positivity or toxic optimism. I think that there's sometimes a tendency to be, as a director, just always being, positive and everything is great. I think that we also have to acknowledge that this is hard. Last summer was a really hard summer. There are going to be things that we face that are difficult. It doesn't mean that we have to crumble, but I think that if we just skip that stage and not accept the yuck, that there are things that maybe the staff, it is a little more yucky, or it is a harder summer than we wanted, but we need to be empathic with ourselves and recognize that sometimes this work is really hard, and like to own that and have that moment and recognize, like, yes, I'm having a moment, and being compassionate with ourselves. I think we also, as directors or people who are working in this, I think we need to also look at our thoughts and see if we are falling into some thinking traps. Are we sort of like jumping to conclusions or having a lot of what ifs or a lot of negative self-talk? We can't always control the situation, but we always can control the way we're talking to ourselves about the situation. And then again, I think, again, that goes back to that support, that we really need to lean on each other. I was just listening to a podcast, actually an Audible, about called Strength to Strength. It's about living like your second best half of your life. And they were talking about aspen trees, and how aspen trees are these beautiful trees that grow in aspen. And if you look at them, their roots are all interconnected. And it's because their roots are very shallow, but because they're interconnected, that they can grow and flourish. And I think that it's this interconnection that we have to keep coming back to.
Yeah, I think that that's really important. And I think, as a camp director, something that I think of when that is that go ahead and build that support system early. I think that we often, we talk a lot about self-care for directors and like, what are we going to do? But then it comes to like May, June, campers arrive and we have no plan. So listen to what you're saying. The advice that I would give a camp director would be like, think about that now. What is your support going to look like? Is it your family? Is it other camp directors? Is it friends? Is it other directors working with you? Is it the kids? Is it the staff? And how are you going to intentionally do that this summer? Because I think that we often think, well, camp is community, camp is connection, I'm getting my fill of that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are, because we're on a different level. So yeah, I think that, can you set aside, say, every Tuesday for 30 minutes, I'm going to go in a cabin no matter what it is and get your connection that way? Or every Wednesday, I'm going to be off with the counselors who are off that night, and I'm going to go to dinner with them, or I'm going to ask them to sit at my table for dinner, or I'm going to call my best friend for 45 minutes every Thursday, or even just 10 minutes every Thursday, or whatever it looks like for you. I just think that that is great advice. It does build our resilience to get through the summer, and we often don't prioritize it ourselves. And so I just advise the director.
Yeah, and I think it's a human condition for us to often focus on things that are urgent but not as important. And I think that this toilet in this cabin isn't working, or this person I have to discipline, and all those things take our attention. So I think you really do need to be delivered and to sort of carve out that time. In my school, we have something called Staff Supporting Staff, and every month we have a program where the staff comes together and we connect with one another. This April, we're doing something. We're all going to make like a little take and make herb garden, and the theme is you can go through challenges or you can grow through challenges. And so we're connecting in that way. Around Valentine's Day, we did like also a little thing where we made scrub for everybody, and the staff came into the staff room and did that. So those are our projects that we sometimes do, but a lot of times we just connect and we talk about topics like burnout, or we talk about anything that's on people's minds, so that they have a place just to connect, and not to kind of like marinate in criticism and vent and things like that, but to be productive and to acknowledge and be empathic with one another.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, like, for me this summer, I'm glad that we're talking about this a little bit, or last summer, probably one of the worst days I've had in camp history. And I mean, two of my jet skis went down, my tractor went down, my ATV went down, a horse passed away. Like, it was a day that I will never forget. Oh, we had some COVID cases. I mean, it was a really tough day. And I took 5 minutes to just post in a Slack, our summer camp society Slack that we have with other people who have done summer camp society programs, and just said, like, guys, I don't need any feedback, or y'all, I don't need anything. I'm not complaining per se, but I just have to get this out because I have to put it in the universe. Someone has to know it, and I can't dump this on my staff. So to have that community, for me, like, I was way better after doing that, just getting to talk about it with people. So I think that that's great.
Right. So what happens, just so you understand hormonally, is that when we are stressed, we emit cortisol. And when we connect, we emit oxytocin. And oxytocin is combats cortisol. So there is like a hormonal reason why this works,
Yes,
that this connection actually is so powerful.
yeah, I absolutely love that. And then when you said, the urgent versus important, I think that that's so important for people. And as I have been doing more camp consultant recently, I've really been talking to people about, yes, I understand that you want a quick win because you have a lot on your plate and it just feels so easy to get that quick win. But what is the long term of that quick win? Because I think you just bit yourself off way more than you could chew in the long run of things. So I think that kind of goes along with resilience too, because we just think like, oh, do it real quick and don't worry about building the skill, take the quick win, but it doesn't prepare you in the long term.
Right. And I think that I think today there's also just such an emphasis on what feels good in the moment versus what feels good in the long run. But as human beings, our brain is wired to value what's going to feel good immediately versus something in the future. And I think it's important for us to know as human beings that we have that glitch a little bit, that we are going to value something that's going to be a short-term fix, even though it might cause long-term issues, and be aware of that we don't fall into that glitch as much as we can.
Yeah, I love that. So what do you think are the basic components of nurturing resilience in young people? We've talked about a lot of them. We talked about the storms. Is there anything else that you have with that?
So, as I said, like in terms of the way that I kind of lay out the book. So as I said, I have it by those different chapters. So the first thing is about, understanding. Actually, let me take that back. So when I wrote this book, I have the child book, but then I have these two online sections, one for educators and one for professionals and parents. And I really urge the reader that before they do this book with the kids, that they go on there, and there's some really great activities for them to build their own resilience, like we talked about, and then for them, how they can build resilience in young people, either as educators or as parents and professionals. And then I do think that it's really important. And then in the book, also the way I outline things is that I have it learn it, do it, strengthen it, and a bonus section. So again, I think that first we have to learn these skills. Like we have to understand what they are. We have to practice them, and then strengthen them. And then there are these bonus activities where they're special adults, and that can be a camp counselor or somebody they work with, or a parent, or somebody in the Boys and Girls Club, if you're an after school club or anything like that. They can work with a child, and in that moment, by doing this activity, build resilience. And the other thing that I do in the book is I have puzzles at the end of the chapter, because a way to check their learning. And again, puzzles are also a really good way, because they are challenging, that in that moment, they are able to build their resilience. So that's sort of the outline of how I set things up. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else in terms of key things. Like, as I said, in terms of resilience, there's a lot about optimism and having a growth mindset, I think, that are really important. I think that also being flexible. I mean, I don't know about you, but every day I have to be flexible in so many different ways. And I think that a person who's resilient is able to be flexible. They have a flexible mindset. They have a flexible way of acting in this world. And I also think in camp, if you anyone who works in camp knows you have to be flexible. You can plan this, and then it rains or something happens, and everything goes out the window, right? So I think that using these moments to work on these skills and to think of these are going to be really powerful moments to build resilience is really helpful. Yeah. And the other thing I would also say is that in terms of community and structure, I think one of the things that we can also do is that when kids help other kids, I think that that's also powerful. And there are opportunities in camp for like older campers to work with younger kids and to help them with things. I think that's also a really powerful way that we can build resilience.
Yeah, that leads into a good question that we had in the chat, in the Q&A from Alice. I'll read it to you. It says, what's the best way to teach this to staff? I find the staff struggle with resilience and they need to be able to model it for kids, but I also don't want to look at it like we're talking down to them.
Right. So I think that for them, I think like, again, as I said, as somebody who wrote a book for teens, I think that teens are and young adults are kind of a tricky audience. You really do need to get their buy-in. Like you can't, like, I think your question was very wise. It can't, you have to have this exactly right tone to figure out how to talk to them. But I think that joining with them and saying, listen, I know that the last few years have been really tough. I think that what we're going to see with our campers is that they're probably going to come in with a harder time dealing with stress, that they are less flexible. What I'm also noticing is that kids have much weaker social skills. Like they don't, like in terms of playing games or things like that, they just don't have an experience. Also, a lot of people have been masked and they haven't been reading facial cues. So this summer might be challenging this way. We want to kind of put our heads together and figure out ahead of time how we can help you be more successful and ultimately your campers. But I think you need to partner and sort of brainstorm. And sometimes, again, using maybe your more seasoned staff, maybe if you have any returning staff to help facilitate these conversations, say like, I noticed this, like, what are things where you saw kids falling apart? What were some of the more stressful things that you saw were for campers? Also, what were some stressful things for you as staff? I know that a lot of the staff felt it was very hard. They had to stay at camp. I know that I heard that there was this one camp that decided, because they really wanted to encourage staff not to like go away or go out, they like got them this gorgeous house with a swimming pool and a jacuzzi and everything. And they thought, okay, this is going to be amazing. They're going to love to go to this house on their days off. But the staff didn't, because they didn't give them any choice. They didn't have any control. And maybe they'd rather go sleep at a beach and do it their thing than when it's just so much top-down management. So I think that part is really important.
Yeah, I think that that's something that has been successful for me is we are youth development professionals, as a psychologist, us as camp directors, but our staff feel like they're youth professionals because in a lot of ways they are youth, like they're so close to it. And so we hear this stuff year round, and some of us work year round with kids, whether it's before and after school or we have a lot of camps or whatever, but still kind of phrasing it in this is what we're hearing about kids. We are hearing that kids are having more anxiety than ever. We are hearing that kids are struggling with resilience. We're hearing that resilience is good for kids. Like, what do you feel like that's true? Is that happening around you? Are you seeing that with the kids younger than you, your little brothers and sisters, your cousins, your friends? Are you feeling in that way? And then that kind of helps them not feel like you're talking down to them, really like you're having a conversation, like you're looking for knowledge. Because in a lot of ways, we are looking for their knowledge because we're trying to serve them, and you can serve people better when you know their individual needs.
Right.
All right. How do you experience resilience in your own life?
So as I mentioned before, so in 2017, I wrote this book called The Grit Guide for Teens. And it was I just lost my glasses. It was a really, I'm not trying to be braggy or anything, but it was a really banner year. I wrote this book. I did the New York Marathon. I was like, had New York School Psychologist. Like I had all these like great things. And then all of a sudden I went, I just started to get sick. I didn't feel well. I was like going from doctor to doctor. I didn't know what was sort of going on with me. And then ultimately I found out that, like I mentioned, this hormone called cortisol. I had a problem with my cortisol. It was actually, I had a growth of my pituitary. It wasn't malignant or anything, but it was causing this cortisol to be emitted all over my body. So that is the stress hormone that people sometimes feel when they're stressed, but I was having this being emitted because of this thing on my pituitary. And it was really debilitating. And I'm a very like active, excited, really like energetic person. And I just didn't feel well. And it took a long time. I had to have a surgery. And so, and also again, like I was known as like this gritty girl, but then I just couldn't be the way that I wanted to be. And so it really taught me, about resilience, and a lot of the things that I did for myself. That's what I sort of put in this book, or how I think about resilience, the things that help me, help children. And like, for example, one thing that I really love, and something like a quick takeaway that I felt was so super helpful for me, was Kristen Neff's work called the Self-Compassion Break, which is kind of like a mindfulness moment that you have where you first recognize, and I think this is something you could teach your staff or directors can do is, again, Kristen Neff. She has this thing called self-compassion break. If they want to look it up, it's also in my book. There are lots of examples of it. Basically, you say, I'm having a moment of suffering. So when I was feeling sick, I'd say, okay, this is a moment of suffering. Again, it goes back to accepting the yuck. And to be human is to suffer. I think it's very, very helpful to recognize that you're not alone. Sometimes when we're suffering, we think we're the only person suffering. And so we take a moment, we recognize that we're suffering, we recognize that to be human is to suffer, and then we're compassionate with ourselves. We put a gesture on our heart and we say to ourselves that I will be okay, and that this is a moment and this will pass. And being compassionate instead of judgy. Because again, I would judge myself and be like, oh, I can't do things, or aren't people going to think this about me? But instead, trying to be more compassionate and kind to myself. So that's like a good example of something that we can do, or something I learned from my resilience journey that I feel like I incorporated both on the online section for adults and also in the book.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Speaking about the online section, I know you mentioned it earlier too, and I meant to say this then, but I'm glad it got brought up again. I was, doing research to do this and looking at it a little bit, and it's super easy to access. So if anybody wants that, get your book and then get access to it, and don't think it's like hard to get, or you won't be able to find it, or you have to email you to get it. Like, y'all make it really easy on the website to get, and it's right there. So super easy.
You could just, you just have to go to New Harbinger, and they're like these free online tools. And there's also some cute posters. There's a storms poster, and there's the accept the yuck poster, and there's also pump up the positive, are these posters that you can kind of blow up. They're also free.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's really cool. I will try to get that link in the chat for everybody in just a second. We talked a lot already about it, but I want to revisit it in the camp space this summer. And do you have any other practical ways that we can build resilience? Let's kind of start, if you can, in just campers, because I want to talk a little bit more about staff in a second.
So again, in terms of campers, I think that to sort of be more intentional in terms of the way that when they're doing activities that are a little bit like out of their comfort zone, to sort of acknowledge that if they're not there, they're just not there yet, to have that kind of growth mindset, to like know that fail just means your first attempt in learning, instead of thinking of fail is a complete disaster. At my school, for example, we do a fail wall where everybody puts something that they failed at and what they learned. And then, which can be fun in camp, we also asked the principal. We also wrote to some famous people to see if they would contribute to their fail wall as well, so that that everybody sees that they're not alone. It goes back to what I said before, because when we're struggling, we think we're the only people that are struggling, and that's obviously, not the case. I think that those are real ways. And the other thing is that having, I like these 3-letter words, and yet. So a lot of times when we talk to campers, we'll say, you can't, a statement and then say, but what I would encourage everybody to do is change that but to the word and. So, we can't go to the canteen, but we'll go tomorrow, right? So there's something like that we'd say, right? Or, you can't do this, but blah, 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 blah. But instead use the word and, like, we can't go to the canteen, and I know that might be disappointing. So changing but to and also adding that word of yet if something isn't there yet.
I'm so glad you said that, because I have actually know a lot of people in my life who have been making the transition from but to and they've been doing it for a few weeks, and I tried to do it because they were doing it, but I had no idea why I was doing it, to be honest. So that is super. So you have just
because basically and as I said, there's a chapter about that, because basically when you say but, what it does is it kind of kicks to the curb everything that was in front of it, and it feels really not empathic to the person. And so sometimes people feel like they just have to keep ramping it up until you understand that this is important. But when you use the word and, it's more dialectical. It's saying that there's this thing and there's this thing. And then in camp, there's a lot of times when you're sort of torn or split in lots of different directions, either with campers, like, yes, I know you like arts and crafts, and it's time for kickball, right? So like using that word and, so you feel like you heard people doing this, but you had no idea why people were doing the and
I've
thing?
been doing it because I didn't know why. Yes, that is
Yeah.
super helpful. Awesome. I love that. And then let's talk about staff. I know we've mentioned them a lot, and a lot of the things that apply to campers would apply to staff, especially like the fail thing. I could see people doing that in the staff meeting. And while I can see some people like some moments of it being hysterically funny, I think it also opens up a whole space for our staff to be vulnerable and for them to know that failure is okay and everything. So I
Right.
absolutely
I
love
do think
that.
that that's important message because I don't know. I always felt like I used to say to my counselors, listen, you're not going to get in trouble if you tell me or somebody higher about a problem. Where there's going to be problems is if the whole summer goes and then at the end you're like, I don't think this kid should go back to camp. And I didn't know that anything was going on, or even if you don't think that, but then I find out later that there's a big problem. So I think it's really, really important with our staff to really model this idea that we make mistakes, that we talk about mistakes, that we grow from mistakes. And so we really need to be deliberate about that, because I think that that they're nervous about sharing these things. And I think that again, things like social media and things like that have really made it really, like a lot of teenagers, they think everybody's life is, unicorns and rainbows, and it's hard for them to acknowledge that other people make mistakes and that's okay, and we can grow from those things.
Yeah. And I'm wrapping my head a little bit around the supporting our staff and how we can make sure that they have the support that or the connection that you talked about, really. And just realistically, there are people who work at our camps who don't feel connected. We can have a staff of 30 people and you have 2 who just don't feel part of the group, or you can have a staff of like 160 people and you have just 5 to 10 who don't. Maybe they're great counselors, even they're great with the kids, they're phenomenal, but when it comes to the staff with it, they just don't feel like they're getting that connection. So some things that I as a camp director think of there is, how can we support them? Do we know other camp directors with other people like that we can connect them with? I know that YUSA is looking at creating some cohorts specifically around BIPOC staff members to lean on each other outside of their individual camps, but they're involved in camping as a whole. So those would be some resources that I can think of off the top of my head. Do you think that even though you're physically in person, these off-site connections can fill that connection bucket as well?
I do, but I also think, like, again, to be more deliberate about that. Like, I know that, for example, we were thinking of, I heard somebody saying that that people should do, like in the school or even in camp, and you could do this campers or with staff, like you write a list of everybody's name, and then everyone should think, who do I have connections with? And if you don't have a connections, like let's say the higher level staff looks at their staff members and they say, who here, like, let's look through all our staff. Who here are we all connected with? Who, or even with the kid, even the staff who's connected with them. And if there's somebody who is like not getting picked up, like there's no mark there name, then I think that we need to figure out, how do we connect that person? What do we do deliberately to make that connection? Just
Yeah.
like we said before, like just like some kids are more resilient, or some kids read more. Some counselors, it's easier for them to connect than others. It doesn't mean that they don't want it. They just need sometimes a little bit more hand holding to get there.
Yeah, I like that. I totally stole this idea. I didn't. It was not my original idea, but I cannot remember where I stole it from. So if it is from you, credit to you and write it, and we'll put it on our YouTube when we post this later. But it was the idea of like making a template of your cabin, or if you have a day camp group, you could just do more of a thing like you were saying, just like the list of names, but print out, like, get on Canva or whatever you have, even Microsoft Word, make a model of where your beds are, or where your bottle of, maybe where your kids sit at day camp, where they typically sit at lunch, or you can just do the names and just physically draw the lines. Like, okay, this is Susie, and Susie already came to camp with Sally and their cousins, and Sally went swimming with Billy today, or whatever. Just map it out physically, and it makes you think about it on such a different level. So if you can have that ready for your staff, and I found that kind of forcing them to do stuff like that doesn't work. It's just another piece of paper that they don't love. But at least give it to them as a resource when they are having a more challenging week, or they do have a camper that they feel like needs more support, or they do feel like they have a camper who's just not meshing as well. They have that resource, and I think they'll pull it out if they know that they have it and they know that stuff is really struggling. I think
Yeah.
that's a good one. If you have any questions, we would love for you to pop them in the chat. Let me look at our lists. What are some obstacles that might come up at camp? And this is the last question that I have. So anything that you want to put in the Q&A or chat, I am monitoring that and we'll get to it in just a few minutes.
So what are the obstacles towards building resilience, or what are obstacles just in camp in general?
Well, let's focus on resilience at camp, or resilience just in general, and then maybe resilience at camp.
So what are the obstacles to building resilience, you're saying?
Yes.
So I think that, again, when people are stressed, there can be, and also even anxious, people have a tendency to avoid things. And avoidance, again, makes you feel good in the moment, but in the long run doesn't build those resilience muscles. So I think you want to avoid avoidance. I think that, again, that sometimes kids who really need to connect send out vibes and behaviors that make them not so easy to connect with. And I think sometimes you really have to dig deep to figure out how to connect with kids. I think sometimes we need to be both indirect with our campers and our staff. So with our campers, sometimes it's better to ask for their help than to try to help them. And then when campers are helping, they then actually also feel that if you ask a camper or a staff member for help, you also are showing that, hey, even the bigwigs are asking for help, so it's not so bad to get help. And also, I think it allows them to sort of put their guard down. I've done a lot of work in my school where I don't kids are, especially during COVID, I found that some kids were falling through the cracks and having a lot of difficulties. And so instead of me having sessions with them, I had them come help me clean my office, and they really liked helping. So, and I think that's also really important with staff. I think sometimes you need to be what we call stealthy in your interventions. You can't do things directly. And having staff help you in something or take on a project is a really great way to connect. Some people, you can just chat, but there's some people that that's not the vehicle. And I think you have to be a little creative about how you're going to make those connections.
Yeah, how about that? I think those are all really helpful tips. I think that I've taken a lot away from today. Just I've taken a step back from Camp Director, but as a consultant and as a parent, especially, I think that I can use that every day. So thanks so much for sharing. Again, if anybody has any last minute questions, you can put them in the Q&A, and we can kind of wrap up, unless there's any questions, with you telling us how can we get your book? Where can we? I put your link in the chat. Is that the best place to get it? Is there another best place? How do we get it?
Yeah, I mean, you can go on my website, and on the website there are all these places, from Amazon to New Harbinger, Target, Barnes and Noble, all places where books are sold. You can get the book, and you can also go on my website. Also, the book launch, which I did last week, which was really fun, and also have a lot of really good information, is also a little video clip is on there, and there's a cute little book trailer, so you can learn all about that from my website, or even just Google it on YouTube.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and we will link to that stuff in our YouTube as well. And your cover art is really cute. I just feel like I have to tell you that's a really, really pretty cover.
The cover, yes. And that's, yes, I had to be, by the way, so when I wrote the Grit Guide for Teens, and then I wrote the book for resilience, and you should know, I don't know if people know, when you're an author, you have no control over the cover. I don't know if anyone knew that. I didn't know that, but yes, you do not have any control. They get to do whatever they want with the cover. And so I really wanted this cover to be cuter than the cover I have for Grit Guide. I like Grit Guide, but it was not going to work for little kids. And so I was really, really pleased with the cover. And they did say that they were going to go in a little bit of a different direction with it. So it is very cute. And there's illustrations throughout the book just to make the things kind of come to life, especially for young kids. Sometimes people ask me, what age is the book for? I think that's a really good question. The publisher always wants the widest range, but I do think that the book is really great, for ages 7 to 9, they definitely need to do it with somebody. And then from 9 to 12, they definitely can do it independently. But I think the book is designed so that children do it with somebody. I mean, again, I hope you come away with this notion that that's what resilience is about, is that ability to partner with somebody, to connect with somebody. When people, again, over and over, people talk about things like ACEs. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but the number, and then they have, PCEs, was a positive child events. If you really look at those things, they're all about connection. And that's ultimately why I think camp is such a great place, because I think camp, if you really think about it, is like where friendship is developed, where people really make these deep connections. So as I said, that's really one of the big messages I want to get across today.
Yeah. And as a camp director myself, how I would use your book, and this is just how I do a lot of books that are, because so many books are not for the camping industry, but they are for youth development. And again, we are youth development professionals. And so we should be reading that literature. We should be reading books on anti-racism, on youth development, on community building, on every aspect of on building better waterfronts. I don't, everything goes back to camp. And so I would literally just read your book or any book like that, and with a highlighter, thinking about my camp with a pen in it, write my own notes in it, print out your parent guide, print out your other guides, think about how it can apply at my camp, and then put it into action and use some exercises during staff training, show excerpts during staff training, maybe just I always kind of look at things with two lenses, as a personal thing, but then also like look at your specific camp. And I think that this book has so many uses at your specific camp. So I think it's a great thing for people to get.
Yes, actually, I want to say something. My first book, I said I had wrote 2 books, but my first book that I actually did was I wrote a workbook for staff for Camp Ramah. So all the staff had this workbook, like a week by week approach to being a successful counselor, and it was for counselors. And in some ways, this has like a kind of similar format. So it was for the counselors to do, and it was also again a workbook format. But this book would also, when I had the book launch, Bob Brooks, who is a really big researcher in resilience, and Ken Ginsberg were there, and Rindy Jane. I don't know if people are familiar with her work as well. But what they were excited is that there are a lot of stuff for grown-ups to do and how they can build resilience, but there isn't a lot out there for kids. So like, how can kids themselves build a skill? And so I'm really excited about filling that niche and having an opportunity for kids to, and for all of us to make what I call ripples of resilience. That's why I do this work. I really love to get this message out. I think we all agree that kids need to build that resilience. And I think that we are all in this amazing opportunity, if we work in camp, to have this perfect place to do that. So thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. If you are watching, if you're with us on Zoom, and then put a couple of links in the chat for you. If you're watching this back on YouTube, then I will have the same links in the description. We are, again, so thankful that you were here. I think this is great information, really relevant to our camp spaces right now. And I'd love for everyone to go get Dr. Caren's book, and also to help build resilience in kids this summer. Thank you all so much. All right, everybody, have a great day.